G'day there, you're watching the Aussie BIM Guru, and today I'm going to be running a quick course in Grasshopper for Rhino. So essentially a course that lets you spring into action and get started. So I'm going to show you just roughly how the software works, and then from there you can have a play with it. So Grasshopper, I probably already touched on it briefly in my crash course for Rhino video. So it's built and integrated into Rhino by McNeil and Associates. Highly recommend you watch my crash course video if you're not aware of how Rhino works or the fundamentals. But if you're aware, then feel free to watch on. So this video is really for people that have very basic experience with Rhino. Obviously, if you've got advanced experience, great. You probably already know about Grasshopper. But ideally, it's tailored towards design and computational architects who are looking to get started quite quickly. And ideally, you've got a bit of familiarity with Dynamo or the concept of coding or visual coding. So Grasshopper, if you're not aware of it, is basically a visual coding language, which enables us to enhance how we put our designs together. It does a lot more than that, but it's most commonly known to create quite advanced and complex forms with very intricate underlying form-based algorithms that generate them. But it can do a lot of other things as well, such as machine learning, and it can do a lot of iterative functions that would take other software quite a long time, including Dynamo. So in terms of how it benchmarks itself versus Dynamo, I will do a video shortly that shows how you can benchmark the two platforms quite easily to prove to your company that it actually is superior to Dynamo when it comes to dealing with geometry. I find the interface is much more superior as well, so this video will show you some of those features that I think are far better. And also on the horizon, for people that aren't aware of it, there's a package called Rhino Inside, which enables Rhino to run in many platforms, in particularly Revit. So there is the potential that Grasshopper may actually overtake Dynamo as a scripting language to interface with Revit, if this keeps moving in the direction that it is. So quite exciting. But to get started, I'll just give you a few tips of what you need to do to actually start using Grasshopper before I move into it. So you can get Grasshopper from this website here. It's included in Rhino 6 by default, but earlier versions will need installation. So Rhino 5 and Rhino 4 will need to be downloaded from this website from the links. There's some beginners tutorials which I highly recommend you watch. I'm not going to show you everything about Grasshopper from the beginners level. I'm really just going to show you the interface, some tips and tricks, and some little things that I really like about the program, having used it so far for about 2 weeks. But there's a great series by David Rutten that I recommend you watch that really helps you get started with Grasshopper and shows you some basic functions to teach you the fundamentals of list logic and geometry logic in Grasshopper. So there's just little videos that you watch which have Vimeo links, and you can just click through them and follow along with each one, and I found they were great to get me started. There's also a lot of custom add-ons available at the website Food for Rhino. They're usually named after other animals, which I think is quite funny and a little bit cutesy, which is a nice touch. And there's a really strong community of developers in the Grasshopper community, and a really strong user base as well. So you can just find them on this website and you can search for them. There's also a really great website that I found which has really good component references for both custom and default nodes in Grasshopper. So it has a massive library that you can search through. If you're looking for a particular function, this could be a good way to find it. So anyway, but let's spring into action and actually look at Grasshopper just a little bit. And I'll show you some tips and tricks that have helped me so far in using it. So we're just going to jump into Rhino. The most important thing to start Grasshopper is you just type Grasshopper. So assuming you have it installed, there's Grasshopper. So sometimes when you open it, you may have a little palette of files that it's prompting you to open. You get a little history dialog sometimes. I'm just opening it for the first time, so I'm just going to create a new document. And essentially we'll just start by having a look around at our interface. So I might just maximize Grasshopper. And I'll just save my script as well before I start. So we'll just call this unnamed. Okay, so probably the two most important things to note is the first thing is we're on a canvas. This is our coding or our noding canvas to work on in Grasshopper. So usually people start in the top left or they zoom out and they start in the middle from what I've been told. There's a lot of buttons around here. I won't focus on all of them. It's important to note some of the movement commands. So pan is your right mouse button. You can zoom with the mouse wheel, and that's pretty much it. There's no orbiting as far as I know. Each set of functions or nodes is stored under these tabs. By default, you'll probably have all the tabs up to here. Beyond this point, these are all custom packages that I've downloaded from Food for Rhino. So some really handy ones that I'm enjoying using: Ladybug and Honeybee for environmental analysis. Heteroptera has some really good mathematics functions that I've found quite useful. Kangaroo for physics has been really interesting. I believe it does a lot more than that. Lunchbox for panelization, which has been very interesting. And GHOW I've been using just to transport Excel data. But for now, we'll just focus on some basic nodes. So I think we'll probably just start off by looking at a node. So you've got a whole bunch of nodes here, but I'm just going to go and get a curve node. And I'm going to get a line between 2 points. And note that all of these panels have a lot more functions hiding within them. So if you click on this little header in each one, you'll get a lot more functions. So there's so many nodes to learn in Grasshopper. I'm only really just starting. So we'll just drag and drop, and I'll just zoom in. So you'll see by default, this is probably what your nodes will look like when they first come in. It's important to note that there's a few ways to look at nodes, and I'll show you that in a second. But let's just look at the anatomy of a node. So we have inputs on the left, outputs on the right, and just the name of the node in the middle. So everything that's happening within the node happens within this body essentially, and data is processed through the inputs and the outputs. So for anyone that's used Dynamo, it's exactly the same. If anything, Dynamo really copied the logic of Grasshopper, or they both copied the logic of visual coding in a nutshell. Okay, so let's actually just set up a function here. So we need 2 inputs on our function. So we're creating a line. If we need to check what we're doing, we can hover over our inputs. You can see we need a start point and we need an end point. So before we move on, I might just show you how you can display these nodes as well. So if you go up to Display tab, you can change to icons, which I notice a lot of users end up doing. The reason why this can be good is because you'll start to recognize the icons in your ribbon and visually match them to what you're looking for. It's up to you what you find easier. At the moment, I've been working this way, but I'm not finding it's really helping me that much, so icons can be helpful as well. Some of the icons are a little bit abstract and don't always really tell you what the node's doing, but you will get used to seeing them over time. Okay. The other thing that is really helpful for beginners is to turn on draw full names. This actually tells you what your inputs are called and your outputs are called, which can make it so much easier to follow what's going on. And for now, I'm going to leave this on. Okay, so the next thing we're going to get is we're going to get a couple of inputs from Rhino. So you can source geometry out of Rhino. Typically, it's just stored under these commands. So under the geometry commands, we have a lot of inputs that we can receive. For now, we're just going to get 2 points. So I'm just going to click 1 point, and I'm going to get another point. And if I just minimize Rhino, or minimize Grasshopper and go to Rhino, I can place 2 points in Rhino. So let's just place 1 and 2. So if I right click on this node, I'll get a whole bunch of options. And really the only ones that we're interested in now is set 1 point or set multiple points. So we're going to go set 1 point, and we're going to pick a point. And you'll see now our input is no longer orange. So orange is basically a warning telling us that we need to check this node. You'll see here if we hover over this that it's telling us that the parameter failed to collect data because it has no point. But as soon as we give it a point, we solve that warning. And you'll see that Grasshopper previews the points with a cross. You can change what the points look like under your display options. But you can also right click on nodes and turn off their preview. And you'll see that now we no longer see that output. So it's up to you how many things you want to preview during the course of your script. But every single node that collects data that's geometric will display a preview in Rhino. But note that it's only temporary. It's not creating a permanent point. It's just creating a point visually. Okay, so let's connect up our node. So we have a start point. Note that nothing happens at the moment, but as soon as I connect my endpoint, we just gained the line in Rhino. So the really great thing about Grasshopper is that these are all dynamically being controlled. So if I move one of these points around, you'll note that it will actually update. So Grasshopper follows Rhino essentially. So as this changes, everything else will update. And this is really the power of Grasshopper. It will constantly update itself, and it works so fast that I haven't seen it really be a problem yet. Whereas in Dynamo, you might be used to pressing run every time you want to update your script. So it's a different way of working, and it does take some getting used to. Okay, so probably beyond this, we've looked at sourcing geometry from Rhino. So how about we look at getting another node? So we're going to get a divided path node, and we're going to divide this line into some points. But instead of going to the tab, let's say I don't know where this tool is. I'm going to right click double click. I'm used to my Dynamo version where you right click instead. And I'm just going to get divide curve. So you see, even if I write divide path, it sort of knows what I'm looking for. So you'll see now we need a few things. So we need a curve, we need a count, and we have kinks. But note that we don't have to specify kinks because it has a default value of false. So we're going to take our curve, and look at that. We didn't even specify the count, and already it's being divided. That's because count has a default value of 10. But let's say we want to change this from 10. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a number slider. So essentially you can get number slider, I believe, under, I'm not sure if it's under this area. I don't even know where this one is yet, actually. There it is. It's under input. So if I just click on this, I can create a number slider. So by default, it's between 0 and 1. This isn't suitable for this case. So what you can do is go to edit, and a lot of nodes have a lot of properties within them that you can edit. So I'll show you some of those and some of these other ones shortly. This one's a special one. So you can go edit, and you'll get a whole bunch of properties about how your slider is set up. So you can have a rounded figure, you can just have integers, which in this case we want, only even or only odd. And there's a lot of things you can change in this particular node itself. So it's always worth right-clicking and having a look at what you're dealing with. So let's say our minimum divisions are 2, our maximum divisions. Note that I'm typing and then committing with this tick button. Let's say they're 20. Cool. So you can see that our range is 18. This is basically our value. So if we OK this, you'll see now our slider has changed. So let's just connect this up to our count. And immediately you'll see this is dynamically updated. And what's really cool now is you get to see the feedback visually occurring, and you'll see how quick that is. It's very quick. And obviously it's not freaking out, it's not slowing down, it's not spinning, it's very quick. So let's just connect that up, and let's get another line. And we'll just connect that up, and let's copy all these nodes as another set, and I'm going to specify these 2 other points to create another line that's being divided. So we'll go 1 point and 2 points. And there we go. And you'll see that we can adjust these separately from each other. So let's just connect these together again using our start point and our end point. And you'll note that we get a whole bunch of parameters about the line. We don't just get the line itself. So we get the points as a list, tangents and parameters. This is for our divided path. We can also get the tangents at each point as well along the curve. So we're getting a lot more data about our elements than you might be used to seeing in Dynamo, which I find really useful. It's really nice to have this information ready in so many nodes like this. But what we're going to do now is we're going to take 2 lists of nodes. So note that these are stuck on here at the moment. So I have the choice of connecting like this, or I can hold Control and disconnect my node. So if I hold Control, it will unconnect, I can reconnect, and I can hold Control. Note in this case, when this 1 point is connected, all the points are going to 1 point. That's because by default, most nodes in Grasshopper default to what we call a longest lacing version. So even though we have 10 points here, we only have 1 point here. So basically this 1 point is going to be sourced 10 times. What we can do instead is let's connect these 2 points up. And at the moment, note that we've divided these 2 lines 9 times each. So they have an equal number of points to connect. If I start changing this number, note that they start sort of clumping on the end. So this is how longest lacing behaves. So it goes to the last item in the list, and we'll force it to basically clump at the last item. So you can see that it just keeps using the last item until it runs out. So lacing is a little bit different in Grasshopper to how it works in Dynamo, which is good. The way it handles lacing is much more efficient than Dynamo, where you right click and specify the lacing per node. So there's actually functions for lacing. So we can say longest, and we can force a longest list, or we can get a shortest list. And a shortest list works differently. So the way that you work with lacing is you connect the 2 things you want to lace, and you use those as your outputs. And instead, our lacing will behave differently. So you'll see as we run out now, we just stop using that last item. So you'll see that it trims it to the end in this case. And most lacing nodes will have a few options. You can trim from the start, you can trim from the end, and you can even interpolate to try and roughly match the length of the lists to the indexes that are being used. So I find that's very intuitive. There's a more complex version of lacing called cross product. So that one pretty much sources every possible option between two lists. So you'll see this one is a lot more complicated. It connects every possible outcome between the two lists. So we use that one sometimes when we're trying to create a lot of outcomes. In this case, let's just keep our shortest lacing on at the moment, and we'll just go to equal divisions of 9 each. Okay, so essentially we've created dynamic feedback, and obviously as this updates, you'll see everything else is still updating very quickly. So it's very exciting just how quickly this software can work. And this is obviously just the tip of the iceberg, to be honest. There's so much more you can do than just this. A really handy little tip with number sliders that I found out quite early. If you double click and you type in a number, a less than or a greater than sign, a number, say 10, and another one and say 20, and press enter, it will create a number slider between those two numbers set at the number you put in the middle. So that's a really quick way to create a number slider without having to go into edit and change the properties. I use that one all the time. Keep in mind too, most nodes you can actually right click and change their name. So I could say divisions 2, and I could call this one divisions 1. This way your users sort of know what you're trying to do with your script. Obviously some nodes can be used more than once as well, so I can just use one slider for this particular set of nodes. And you'll see now this controls both of those inputs. So it's important to note you can connect a lot of things more than once. If you ever want to change the destination of more than one wire at once, which is what's connecting these all up, I think you hold down, I think it's Control Shift. Yeah, so if you hold Control Shift and click, you'll see I get to reposition these to a new one. And there we go, that's how easy it is in order to connect those. It's important to notice too, and one thing I really like about Grasshopper is you can change the way the wires work between nodes. So let's say this node is a long way away and it's going through all my nodes and it's very hard to see where it's coming from. I might want to actually right click here and I can set my wire to a faint wire or even to a wireless wire, to a hidden wire, and it becomes a receiver. If I click on the node, it still shows me temporarily where it's going back to, but it makes it a little wireless symbol, and it really cleans up my canvas, which I really like. I find that really helpful in big scripts when it's quite difficult to navigate where wires are going, so it really cleans it up. And it means you can put all your inputs right at the start of your script, even if they don't happen until maybe 2/3 through the canvas. So really useful. So probably beyond that, the next thing we'll look at is what's called a panel. So a panel works a little bit like a code block in Dynamo. Essentially, it also behaves a bit like a watch node. So if I plug this into the end of a data stream, I'll get a list format of what my data is, which can be really helpful just for analyzing data output. Likewise, I can go and get other things and plug them in, and you'll see each time it gives me a representation of what those items are. Really helpful. Panels can also be used for holding data or values. So instead of having this slider, let's connect up a panel instead. And you'll see by default, it's giving me a red node. So a red node, it means that something is not working and needs to be addressed. You can see here that I can't convert text to an integer. But what I can do, I believe I should be able to put in a number. There we go, I put in 5. And you'll see now this can behave as an input as well. So that can be a really helpful input method. So that's really useful. You can also use panels in order to hold on to notes or also to create lists of data. So if I right click on my panel and I turn multi-line data on and I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we end up with a list of 5 values that we can carry forward as in a list structure. So immediately there's a lot of power in the panel. So just be aware of that. Quite useful to know. Okay, so I think after that, I'll just quickly show you expressions. I found expressions really helpful. These are just a way to write a little formula. So if I just look up expression, expression. Okay, we got it. And let's say I want to know where this came from in my palette. So I believe that to find something in a palette, you hold down Control and Alt and click and hold, and you can see it tells you where it came from. It tells me it's from maths and it's under script. Likewise, I could hold down Control Alt, go to curve, and you'll see it's telling me it's under divisions in curve for divide curve. So really easy to find components if you weren't sure where they initially come from. So here what I have is an expression editor. So let's just create a list or a panel. I'll just create a new panel. And we're just going to create 2 line items. Actually, we'll create just a 1, and we'll create a 2 panel. 2, okay. So what I want to do is create a function that multiplies these 2 elements. So the way that an expression editor works is you just double click, and you can type in a formula essentially. There's a lot of ways you can set up your formula. Let's just say we want it to be x. Actually, we'll do a plus b. So what I've done is I've defined 2 variables that don't exist in here by default. So I'm going to right click and change variable x to a and variable y to b. And you'll see I still get a warning at the moment because these 2 variables don't exist. So I'm just going to connect this and connect this. And you'll see now my node's warning is satisfied. And you can see my result is 3. So this essentially passes through an expression. Expressions can be highly complex, so just keep that in mind. Now you may have noticed when I zoomed in on this, I got what's called ZUI, or Zoomable User Interface. Some components in Dynamo, when you get close enough, gain the addition to add, modify, and tweak the way that they're set up. So let's say I want to make a formula that is just a plus a. So it's 2a, essentially. I don't need b anymore, so I can just remove that parameter. And you'll see that now I've simplified my formula. If I zoom out and want to add another parameter, eventually I lose that ability because my zoomable user interface is too far away. So just be mindful some nodes will have behavior. Obviously this one does not, but this one does. So really helpful to know, I think. So from there, I believe that we'll look at enabling and previews. So at the moment, I can disable any part of this script and stop the data from going through. So I'll just say right click, enabled, and you'll see that all my data stops up until this point. Note that all the wires become orange. Essentially that's their way of saying no data is passing through these wires. I'll re-enable this and it should start my script running again. Likewise, I can turn off previews, which can be quite helpful for things when you're seeing a lot of copies of geometry in a row. And on top of that, you can also change the color of your preview by using a node called custom preview. So I'll just double click and look for custom preview. And essentially, this is a special type of node that takes a set of geometry and applies a color to it. So let's take all my lines and I'll hide my original lines and we'll create a color swatch. A color swatch is a great example of a special node where if you double click on this component, you get a little cube where you can change the hue. See that now my lines are changing color as well. So really helpful to know that you have the ability to change the color of elements in your preview. I find this really helpful, but note that there's a little jagged edge after the node. That means that no data goes past this point. It's the end of the line for this node. It's just there to change a color and that's it. So important to understand what some of those colors and also node representations mean. So beyond that, I think I've probably almost got to a point where I'll probably call it a session until we get to some more script building videos. But I'll just show you a few navigation techniques I found really impressive in Dynamo. One thing I really like is this thing called the Markov tool, which essentially just tries to guess the next thing you're going to use based on the last thing you have. So let's say I put down a custom preview. Note that it's trying to figure out what I should use. Notice that a swatch came up. So the Markov tool, based on my behavior in Grasshopper, predicts what tool I'm likely to use after this. So that's really cool, because I probably will use a swatch tool next. If you get used to using the Markov tool, you can save yourself a lot of time in Grasshopper. So really impressive that this tool exists. I think it's highly intuitive and it's all based on your behavior too. So the more you use Grasshopper, the better it will get at predicting what you're going to use. I find I'm already using the Markov tool quite a lot and I've only used it for 1 week so far, just over a week. So beyond that, any node, you can right click on it and go to a little help dialog that tries to explain the inputs, the outputs, and what it does. Some things are more descriptive than others. It just depends on what the node is. So you'll see there, this is a really helpful one. It gives you a lot of information about what's happening. So there you go. And you can also contact the developers in some cases as well. I haven't yet, so I don't know if it works, but an interesting little feature. Okay, so one thing I haven't touched on yet is what's called the radial menu. So if you middle click at any point, you'll get a whole bunch of commands available on the quick command essentially. So one really helpful one is you can obviously middle click and you can turn off preview really quickly. So I can disable preview. I can disable a node as well really quickly. So it saves you just having to click a few times and navigate through menus. Another really helpful thing available on here is the find node. So this little magnifying glass. So if I go to find, I can start looking for things such as line and see what nodes I have in my script that relate to lines. And note that it really quickly highlights what I'm trying to find, maybe even just panel. And you'll see that I only have a few things now that connect up and tell me where I should be looking for panels. And I can obviously start navigating through these and finding them. So in a really big script, this can be really helpful. I believe it even finds custom names. So if I look up divisions 2, you can see it knows to look for those divisions that I set up. So a really cool command to find your way around Grasshopper. I think beyond that, that's really as far as I was going to go today. Probably one last thing that's quite useful, especially for Dynamo users, is that you can group nodes as well. So if you right click whilst you select a big set of nodes and go group, you'll basically put them together into a group, and you can change the color of it as well using another hue selector. So really cool. And you can also right click and change the name of the group, and it gives it a little label. So really helpful. I think just a lot of helpful little tips to get started. But there's obviously so much more under the canvas in this tool. I highly recommend you have a play with it and just sort of familiarize yourself with the components, what they're called, what they do. You can expand it a little bit if you need to see a few more nodes, but there's always going to be quite a lot of them hiding. And obviously as you go through the ribbon, you'll work your way up through types of geometry. So you'll start off with parameters, mathematics, lists, vectors, curves, surfaces and meshes, and B-reps I think they're within the mesh and the surface components. So there's a lot of geometric definitions within here, and obviously you can expand Grasshopper considerably with custom packages. So hopefully this sort of helps get you started using Grasshopper. I highly recommend that you look at the basic tutorials if you haven't already, and just have a play with it, because I'll start doing some tutorials on some basic to medium level scripts just to share what I'm finding in Grasshopper so far. And I want to share a few workflows on Ladybug as well, which is a custom package for environmental analysis. But that's pretty much all for today. So hopefully that helps get you started. Definitely recommend you look into it. It's a great program. So thanks for watching today. I look forward to sharing more videos on Grasshopper in future, probably in 2 weeks' time. If you have any comments or feedback about Grasshopper or the video, feel free to leave it down below or get in touch with me by email. Thanks for watching today, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Thanks. Take care.